The sun had barely started to dip behind the rooftops of our quiet suburban street, painting the sidewalks in an orange haze. I watched my son shove his duffel bag into the trunk of his car, his movements too deliberate, too calm. The way he avoided looking at me made my chest tighten like a vice. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words stuck, tasting bitter as regret already was. I could still hear the engine start, the low rumble echoing down the driveway. He waved without enthusiasm, a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. And then he was gone, swallowed by the evening. I closed the garage door slowly, hoping this was just another one of those teenage spats that would pass. I didn't notice the pizza guy at first. He was holding the bag like it was radioactive, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Sir?" His voice was low, hesitant. I turned, expecting the usual, "Enjoy your pizza." But his eyes flicked to mine with a weird hesitation that froze me. He asked me to put something on the pepperoni one," he said, barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" My voice was steady, though my heart thumped like a jackhammer. The delivery guy swallowed hard. I shouldn't even be telling you this, but it wasn't normal toppings. Something else. Something else. The words repeated in my head like a siren. My son. That boy I had raised. The one I'd spent sleepless nights over. The one who used to hold my hand after nightmares. He had asked a stranger to do harm. To me. I took the bag from him with trembling hands, the warmth of the pizza doing nothing to calm the cold that ran down my spine. I looked at it as if seeing it for the first time, as if the innocuous cardboard box could be a vessel of betrayal. Pepperoni, cheese, dough, and something deadly. I slammed the door behind me, trying to shut out the world, trying to imagine that maybe, just maybe, the delivery guy had misheard. But deep down, I knew better. I had raised him to be ambitious, smart, cunning, and that cunning had turned against me. The smell of the pizza wafted up, tomato sauce, melted cheese, pepperoni curling at the edges, and for a brief second I almost laughed at the normalcy. Almost. Then reality crashed back in. I could die tonight because the person I trusted most wanted it. I dropped onto the couch, the box sitting heavily on the coffee table, and stared at it. My mind raced, thinking of hospitals, doctors, the authorities, but fear wasn't the only thing clawing at me. Anger flared, hot and immediate. My son. My own blood. The betrayal cut sharper than any knife. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears, each pulse counting down the seconds, each breath tasting of smoke and paranoia. The evening outside carried on. The distant sound of kids on bikes, the soft hum of a lawnmower, but inside, the world had shrunk to that box. I didn't know how I'd survive this night, but I knew one thing. I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't touch the pizza. Not yet. My hands shook even thinking about it. I paced the living room, the carpet soft under my feet, but it didn't cushion the storm raging in my chest. The air smelled faintly of melted cheese and tomato sauce. A normal, comforting smell turned sinister. Every so often I glanced at the box on the coffee table, half expecting it to move, to spring some cruel trap. My son had always been mischievous, but this was something darker. I picked up my phone and called the pizzeria. The voice on the other end was chirpy, unaware of the storm I was in. "Hello, this is Tony's Pizza. How can I help you?" "I need to speak to your delivery guy from about an hour ago," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one who delivered to 42 Maplewood Lane." A pause. Yeah, that was Mike. What's going on?" I clenched my teeth. "Did he mention anything unusual? Anything my son asked him to add to the pizza?" There was a longer pause this time. "Unusual? You mean, like extra toppings?" "No, I don't think so." "Why?" I hung up before I said something I'd regret. The trembling in my hands turned into a full-body shiver. My son had left the house less than an hour ago, and already the threat felt immediate. I replayed the delivery guy's words over and over. He asked me to put something on the pepperoni one. There was no mistaking it. Something harmful. Something meant to hurt me. I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my keys and the box, slipping it into a brown paper bag like some kind of evidence in a crime scene. The evening air hit my face as I stepped outside. The sky was a deep indigo, and the street lights flickered like they were struggling to stay awake. My car waited in the driveway, engine cold. I slammed the door, started the ignition, and felt a surge of panic. I drove, aimlessly at first, just trying to get somewhere safe, or anywhere. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, and the only sound was the hum of the tires against asphalt and my own ragged breathing. My mind ran through every scenario I could imagine. Poison, allergy-inducing substances, something invisible I couldn't even see. Each possibility twisted the pit of my stomach into tighter knots. I stopped at the 24-hour pharmacy. I didn't know what I was looking for, but the fluorescent lights felt like a sanctuary. I carried the pizza box inside, cradling it as if it were a child, fragile and dangerous at the same time. A pharmacist glanced at me, eyebrows raised, but said nothing. I muttered something about needing testing, about suspicion of contamination, but the words felt hollow, barely forming. I left the pharmacy with a few bottles of water and antiseptic wipes, unsure if they would do anything. My mind was racing, planning, calculating. I thought about my son, my own blood, the boy who had played in my yard just weeks ago, the one I had taught to ride a bike, now capable of sending me to my death in one swift, calculated move. I went back home, pacing the living room like a trapped animal. The pizza sat there, innocent in appearance, yet threatening with every passing second. I imagined the worst, felt my pulse thundering, sweat beading on my forehead, and then the anger took over. My son had crossed a line I didn't even know existed between us. He had weaponized something I thought was a symbol of comfort, of family dinners, of normal life. I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation, but stopped myself. There was no explanation that could justify this. There was only betrayal. The weight of it settled heavy on my shoulders. I sank into the couch, staring at the box, my reflection mingling with the dim light of the room. I could see every shadow, every detail, the slight curl of the pepperoni, the faint glisten of oil. It was almost mesmerizing in its normalcy, and that made it all the more terrifying. And then I realized something else. I couldn't just wait. I couldn't let this sit here, in limbo, a ticking clock in my living room. I needed information, evidence, a plan. I needed to find out exactly what my son had done, before it was too late. My mind shifted from panic to strategy. I had raised a cunning boy, yes, but I had survived years in the corporate world, navigating ruthless deals, backstabbing partners, and impossible deadlines. I could handle this. I had to handle this. The night stretched on, the shadows deepening as I sat, eyes fixed on that simple cardboard box. Somewhere out there, my son was moving forward, probably thinking he had won. But I swore to myself, a quiet, deadly promise. He wouldn't. Not tonight. Not ever. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, harsh and unrelenting. I hadn't slept. Not really. My eyes felt raw, and the coffee I brewed tasted like ashes in my mouth. The pizza box still sat on the counter, inert and terrifying. I stared at it like a predator sizing up prey, wondering if every second that passed made it more dangerous. My mind spun through every possibility. Poison? Sharp objects hidden under the cheese? Something airborne? I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers, and that meant confronting people. First, I called the delivery guy again. This time my voice was sharper, demanding, though I kept the panic buried deep beneath my words. "Mike, listen to me carefully. Did my son tell you exactly what to put on the pizza?" There was a pause, a shiver of hesitation that made my heart hammer against my ribs. "Sir, he didn't exactly say. He made it clear it wasn't regular toppings. I didn't want to do it, honestly. I was freaked out. I just did what he said." A cold knot twisted in my gut. My son had coerced a stranger, manipulated him into following instructions that could have killed me. And now, the delivery guy was shaking, looking to me for guidance, for a decision I didn't know how to make. I'll get it tested. Don't touch it," I told him, my voice steadier than I felt. I hung up and immediately called the local police. I wasn't sure if this was enough, whether this counted as attempted murder or a prank gone wrong, but I had to cover my bases. I explained the situation quickly, trying to keep calm, but the dispatcher's voice sounded distant, almost robotic, like she couldn't feel the pulse of terror racing through me. While I waited, I paced. Each step echoed through the apartment like a drumbeat. The coffee had gone cold, but I couldn't drink it. My mind was replaying every memory with my son, looking for signs, for warning flags I'd ignored. The way he had lingered in my office late at night, the sly smiles, the subtle manipulations, it all came rushing back, a flood of hindsight that made my stomach churn. Hours passed. By mid-afternoon, a hazmat technician arrived, clad in heavy gloves and a suit that made him look like a moonwalker. He carefully lifted the pizza box, examined it, and placed swabs into sterile containers. My heart raced with every motion. I could feel the tension vibrating in the air, heavy and suffocating. The technician barely glanced at me. "We'll have results in a few hours. Don't touch anything." I nodded, but the command barely registered. I wanted to scream, to shake something, to make this nightmare tangible. Instead, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the box, imagining every possible outcome, and with every passing minute, my anger deepened. How could he, my own son, betray me like this? Then the phone rang. My pulse spiked. It was my daughter, her voice casual, unaware of the storm I was navigating. "Hey Dad, are you busy tonight?" I swallowed the bile in my throat, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I'm dealing with something," I said cautiously. "Call you later." I hung up and stared at the wall. This wasn't just about me. It was about trust, about family, about the fracture in our home that had widened beyond repair. My son had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and yet beneath the rage, a part of me felt numb, hollowed out. The betrayal wasn't just a single act, it was a revelation about the person he truly was. By evening, the lab called. My stomach knotted as I answered. "The tests, sir?" "Sir, the substance is highly toxic. Ingesting the pizza could have caused serious harm or worse." The words hit like a freight train. I sank into the chair, shaking, staring at the box in disbelief. My son had tried to kill me. The reality settled in slowly, a cold, relentless weight pressing down on my chest. Anger, fear, heartbreak, they all mingled into one sharp, bitter taste that I couldn't swallow away. I realized then that I had a choice. I could let fear consume me, let this betrayal define the rest of my life, or I could fight back. Not with violence, not yet, but with strategy, with resolve, with clarity that my son hadn't expected. I looked at the box one last time that night, the smell of pepperoni and cheese still lingering, and I swore silently, I wouldn't just survive this, I would understand why, and when I did, there would be reckoning. Sleep eluded me again that night. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator, each vibration echoing like a warning through my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about my son, about the look in his eyes when he left that morning, the subtle way he had avoided my gaze. There was no hesitation, no second thought. He had been cold, precise, deliberate, and now I knew the depths of it. I needed answers, not just about the pizza, but about him. I had to understand why. My hands gripped the edges of the kitchen counter as I opened my laptop, searching for any clue, any trace of behavior that might explain the unimaginable. Emails, social media, messages. I combed through everything, each click making my heart race. The more I dug, the more I saw the subtle shifts. He had become secretive, distant, calculating, and yet, there were no overt signs that he would ever do something so cruel. By mid-morning, I decided I had to see him in person. I drove to his apartment, the streets of the city blurring past as adrenaline pushed me forward. The smell of exhaust and asphalt filled the car, sharp and bitter, matching the knot of anger in my gut. I rehearsed what I would say over and over, but words felt useless compared to the storm building inside me. I arrived and knocked, my knuckles echoing against the door. A woman answered, unfamiliar, and I asked for my son. She hesitated, then said he wasn't home. My chest tightened. Where was he? Did he even realize the gravity of what he had done? I left, circling the streets, my mind spinning with scenarios. Each one ended with me confronting him, demanding answers, or worse, Him denying everything while the knowledge of what he had done burned between us. I thought about calling the police, but part of me wanted to handle this personally. I needed him to see the human cost, the betrayal, the raw consequences of his actions. Back home, I sat with my thoughts, each one heavier than the last. The pizza box was still there, inert but alive in my imagination. I imagined the moment I had opened it, had I not intervened, how the cheese would have melted in my mouth, how the flavors would have mixed with poison, how trust could have ended in death. The thought twisted my stomach, anger rising until it burned in my chest like fire. And then the memory hit me, a small moment from years ago. He had been 10, sneaking cookies from the jar, lying to me with such perfect innocence. I had laughed, scolded him lightly, and let it slide. I had let small deceits go, thinking them harmless, not realizing they were building blocks for this. Guilt mingled with anger, a cocktail I didn't know how to process. I paced again, thinking. He had planned this carefully. He had enlisted someone else. That meant premeditation, thought, calculation. This wasn't a mistake, a lapse of judgment. This was intent, and intent demanded reckoning. By late afternoon, I decided to confront his friends, anyone who might have seen or heard something. I needed witnesses, context, proof. I started making calls, each ring ratcheting my anxiety higher. The stories that emerged were small, seemingly insignificant details, a text here, a whispered conversation there. But together they painted a picture of planning, plotting, and concealment. The realization hit me hard. I had never truly seen my son. I had raised him, fed him, guided him, but I hadn't known him. And now, the knowledge cut deeper than any betrayal. I felt like a stranger in my own life, surrounded by familiar things but no longer belonging. Night fell again, and I sat alone in the apartment. The lights dimmed low. The pizza box was gone, sealed in evidence, but its presence lingered like a shadow. I realized something else. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting to understand the person who had once been my son, to confront the man he had become, and to make him face the consequences. And I swore to myself that no matter what it took, I would get those answers. I would confront him. And when I did, the reckoning would be complete. The next morning, I woke to a silence that felt heavier than any sound. The city outside my window moved on as if nothing had happened. The distant hum of traffic and faint chirping of birds mocking the chaos swirling inside me. I hadn't slept well. My eyes were dry, my jaw sore from clenching, and my mind replayed every detail of yesterday. Every call, every suspicious message, every imagined scenario of what could have happened had I eaten that pizza. I knew I couldn't wait for him to come to me. He was clever, calculating, and had already shown me what he was capable of. I had to act, to anticipate, to understand. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my car keys, and headed out with a singular focus. Find him, confront him, and understand why my own son had tried to kill me. The streets were crowded, but I didn't notice the cars or the pedestrians. My entire world had shrunk to one thought: him. I remembered his favorite spots, the cafes he lingered at, the little parks he liked to disappear into for hours. I drove to the first one, a small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. The aroma of roasted beans hit me, a fleeting comfort against the knot of fear tightening in my gut. Inside, I scanned the room, heart hammering in my chest, and then I saw him. Sitting in a corner booth, scrolling through his phone, seemingly calm, unaware, or pretending to be, of the storm his actions had unleashed. The sight of him, so casual, so detached, made my stomach twist. The son I had once carried in my arms, the boy who had trusted me with his secrets, was now a stranger. I approached, each step measured but heavy with emotion. His eyes lifted, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by indifference. "Dad," he said, almost casually. I didn't answer. I just slid into the booth across from him, the air between us thick with unspoken words. I studied him, the lines of his face, the way he held himself, the slight smirk that hinted he knew something I didn't. My chest burned with anger, betrayal, and a strange, piercing sadness. "About the pizza," I said finally, my voice low but firm. "What were you thinking?" He looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly, and leaned back. "Thinking?" His tone was almost mocking. "I wasn't thinking about hurting you, Dad. You're overreacting." Overreacting. The word hit me like a slap, sharp and infuriating. "You could have killed me," I said, every syllable deliberate. "Do you have any idea what that means? Any idea what you've done?" His expression shifted. A flicker of something, guilt, fear, or maybe defiance, but it vanished almost instantly. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said, voice steady. "I didn't put anything harmful on it. It was just an experiment. You're too dramatic." I stared at him, disbelief and fury colliding. An experiment? My son had weaponized something as ordinary as a pizza, putting a stranger in the middle of it, and then dismissed it as a joke or experiment. My hands trembled, but I forced them to stay still. I needed clarity, evidence, control. I couldn't let him manipulate me like this. "Mike, the delivery guy, he told me exactly what you asked him to do. And the lab confirmed it. What was on that pizza could have seriously harmed me. You think that's funny? That's reckless. That's dangerous. That's criminal." He leaned forward slightly, a challenge in his posture. "You don't understand. I wanted to see if you'd trust me. If you'd let your guard down. It's just a test." The absurdity of it made my blood boil. My own son testing me with something that could have ended my life. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, deeper than fear. I realized then that this wasn't about a single act. It was about control, manipulation, the cold calculation he had developed somewhere along the way. I drew a deep breath, letting the anger simmer, letting it settle into something sharp and focused. I needed him to understand the gravity of what he had done. Not just to frighten him, not to punish him, though part of me wanted to, but to make him see the human cost of crossing that line. "I raised you," I said, voice barely above a whisper, "and I taught you what's right and wrong. And now I see who you really are." He looked at me, unreadable, but there was a flicker of recognition. Or maybe it was fear. And for the first time I realized this confrontation was only the beginning. There was more to uncover, more to understand, and more reckoning to come. The city outside went on, indifferent to our small, tense booth in the corner. But inside, time had slowed. Every heartbeat, every breath, every glance between us carried the weight of betrayal, trust shattered, and a dangerous path that neither of us could walk back from. I didn't sleep that night, though the city outside my apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that fools you into thinking everything is normal. My mind refused to rest. My son's face haunted me, the calm defiance in his eyes, the way he had dismissed the seriousness of his actions. It was more than betrayal. It was a revelation of who he had become, someone I didn't recognize. The thought made my chest tighten, each breath shallow and jagged. Morning came with the smell of coffee, faintly comforting but powerless against the storm in my head. I moved mechanically, pouring a cup and staring at the steam curling into the air. I knew I couldn't confront him again without understanding everything first. I needed facts, evidence, and insight into the mind of the son I had loved and now feared. I started with his friends. Carefully, almost surreptitiously, I made calls and sent messages, asking questions that sounded casual but were loaded with intent. I learned small things. He had been spending hours online, researching obscure chemicals, reading forums about toxicity, testing boundaries in ways I hadn't noticed. Each detail built a chilling picture. He wasn't just reckless. He was calculating, methodical, planning things I hadn't imagined. By mid-afternoon, I drove to his apartment again, this time prepared. I wasn't sure if I would speak to him directly or find someone who could give me a clearer sense of his state of mind. Parking down the block, I watched him through the window, careful not to be seen. He moved around the apartment as though nothing had happened, putting on music, making a sandwich, scrolling through his phone. The normalcy was infuriating. It was a mask hiding something dangerous, and I had to see past it. I took a deep breath and knocked, trying to steady the whirlwind in my chest. A neighbor answered, a young woman who had seen him go out that morning. I asked casually if she knew where he had gone. Her hesitation told me more than words could. She admitted he had left with a backpack, looking tense but determined. determined. The word rattled in my mind. He wasn't just reckless, he had an agenda, a goal that I couldn't yet grasp. The pieces of the puzzle I had been gathering suddenly formed a pattern, terrifying in its clarity. My son had set events in motion, and I had been watching helplessly, unable to intervene in time. I drove, following the directions I pieced together from his calls, texts, and sightings. The streets blurred past, the exhaust fumes heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of rain that had just begun to fall. My mind raced through every possibility. What if he planned another attack, another experiment? How far would he go? The questions gnawed at me relentlessly. Hours later, I found myself outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place reeked of neglect and decay, and I felt the tension tighten in my chest as I stepped out of the car. Every instinct screamed danger, but I had come too far to turn back. The rain soaked my jacket, cold and sharp, but I barely noticed. I needed to confront this, to understand, to stop the trajectory my son had set into motion. Inside the warehouse was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the cracked concrete floor. I moved quietly, footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. And then I saw him, my son, hunched over a table cluttered with vials, powders, and papers. The sight was surreal. The boy who had once trusted me with his fears now trusted no one, immersed in a world I had never imagined, crafting something dangerous, deliberate, and cold. He looked up, startled, eyes wide, then narrowing in recognition. "Dad?" His voice was low, cautious, calculating. I closed the distance between us in a few steps, stopping just short of the table. The rain dripping from my coat, the smell of wet concrete, and the sterile chemical tang in the air pressed down on me, sharpening my focus. "Explain," I said simply. No pleading, no yelling, just the weight of my gaze, heavy with every emotion I had carried these last days. He hesitated, then shrugged, a defensive mask over uncertainty. "It's just research," he said. "You don't understand it yet. I'm testing boundaries, seeing limits, seeing what people are willing to do, including you." My chest tightened, a mixture of rage and sorrow flooding me. "Testing boundaries? You tried to kill me. You put someone else in the middle to do it. That's not research. That's betrayal. That's malice. That's criminal." He leaned back, eyes flashing with a mixture of pride and defiance. "I needed to see if you'd trust me, if you'd respect me. You never gave me enough credit, Dad. You never understood me." The words hit me harder than the action. Years of neglect, assumptions, and miscommunication had built a chasm between us. And now it wasn't just a chasm, it was a precipice. I could feel the full weight of his isolation, his anger, his cunning. But beneath it all, there was still a trace of the boy I had known, the son I had loved. I drew in a steadying breath, realizing something crucial. I couldn't fix him with anger. I couldn't control him with fear, and I couldn't change the past. But I could stop him from crossing further lines. I could protect myself, protect anyone else who might fall into his experiments. I had to act decisively, with both caution and strategy. The rain continued outside, a relentless rhythm against the warehouse roof, mirroring the storm inside me. And as I stood there, facing the son who had betrayed everything, I knew the next moves would determine everything, not just our relationship, but our lives. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets slick and reflective, turning the city into a mirror of my own muddled thoughts. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't even fully breathed. My mind replayed the warehouse encounter over and over, analyzing his words, his mannerisms, the cold calculation in his eyes. I couldn't just confront him again blindly. I had to understand every move, every motive, every possible outcome. I spent the first hours of the day scouring his digital footprint. Emails, social media accounts, even deleted messages recovered through software I had reluctantly learned to use. I traced his communications, cross-referencing names, locations, and times. Each detail revealed a pattern. He was meticulous, leaving traces that seemed inconsequential, but were part of a larger web of calculation. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't dealing with a rebellious son. I was dealing with a mind that had already begun operating in shadows, thinking 3 steps ahead. By midday, I left the apartment, driving with precision to the various places his messages hinted at. A small storage facility downtown, a local library where he had been researching obscure chemistry texts, a friend's apartment he had spent hours at under the guise of studying. Each stop reinforced the same uncomfortable truth. He had planned this, practiced it, and taken pleasure in the tension it created. He wasn't just reckless. He was calculating. I parked near the storage facility, the rain from the night before still glistening on the pavement, the smell of wet asphalt sharp in my nose. Inside, I found small boxes labeled in neat, almost obsessive handwriting. Powders, liquids, and vials, some marked with chemical names I didn't recognize, others with innocuous labels that could hide dangerous substances. My pulse quickened, fear and fury intertwining. He had built an arsenal, subtle but potent, a collection that could be deadly in the wrong hands, which, unfortunately, was me, if I wasn't careful. I made mental notes, documenting everything with my phone, trying to remain calm, to stay objective. The fear and anger churned beneath the surface, but I forced myself to think strategically. I couldn't act recklessly. I couldn't let him know how much I had uncovered. He thrived on control, on testing limits, and if he sensed I was closing in, he could vanish, leaving me with nothing but questions and potential danger. By late afternoon, I drove back home, the city lights beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows across the streets. I parked in the garage, my chest tight with tension, and went inside to review my findings. Each item, each note, each observation built a story in my mind of how far he had gone, how much planning had occurred, and how easily it could have ended in disaster. I poured a glass of water and stared out the window, watching the traffic below, imagining him in a classroom of life, studying me, testing boundaries, calculating reactions. My thoughts drifted to all the times I had overlooked small signs, brushed off early warning behaviors, thinking I could guide him, that I understood him. That hubris had almost killed me. Almost. The phone rang, startling me. I nearly dropped it. It was Mike, the pizza delivery guy. "Sir, I found something," he stammered, voice shaky. I remembered a detail, something he said. He wasn't just experimenting with the pizza. He mentioned a pattern, a series, and a list of people. "I don't know if I should tell you." "Tell me everything," I snapped, urgency cutting through my weariness. He hesitated, then explained. My son had been testing more than just me. The pizza was one of many experiments. He had cataloged reactions, tested limits, and recorded results in detail. The revelation hit like ice water. This wasn't a personal attack. It was part of a deliberate, obsessive pattern of behavior that I had underestimated at every turn. By evening, I sat at the kitchen table, a mess of notes, photos, and digital records spread out before me. The weight of it pressed down like lead. I realized something crucial. I couldn't just confront him. I had to strategize, to anticipate, to plan my moves with precision. He thrived on fear, uncertainty, and the element of surprise. I had to take those tools from him and turn them against him. I drafted a plan, careful and deliberate. I would confront him with evidence, yes, but I would also protect myself, involve authorities discreetly, and make sure there was a record of every step he had taken. I couldn't risk emotion clouding judgment. I couldn't risk impulsiveness. And yet, beneath the strategy, there was a fire burning. Rage, yes, but also determination. I had been blindsided, betrayed, almost killed by my own son, but I wasn't helpless. I had survived corporate battles, manipulated people far more dangerous than him, navigated crises where lives hung in the balance. I could handle this. I would handle this. Night fell again, deep and heavy, shadows crawling across the apartment walls. I leaned back, exhausted but focused, knowing that tomorrow I would make the next move. I would confront him. I would expose him, and I would reclaim the trust, safety, and boundaries he had so callously shattered. The reckoning was coming, and I would make sure it was absolute. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting slats of gold across my kitchen table, illuminating the chaos of notes, photos, and printouts that chronicled my son's actions. I hadn't slept more than a few hours, and my body ached from tension, from pacing, from the constant churn of fear and anger that refused to abate. But my mind was sharp, focused, and dangerous in its own way. I had to be. He was clever, meticulous, and manipulative, and I had to outmaneuver him at every turn. I reviewed everything again, step by step, line by line, every message he had sent, every forum he had visited, every friend he had involved, every experiment he had orchestrated. My notes connected them like threads in a web, and in that web, I could see the patterns. He thrived on control, on the tension his actions caused, on the knowledge that he could unsettle me with just a single move. But he had underestimated one thing. The father who had raised him wasn't powerless. I wasn't a passive participant in this game. I could play it too, and I could win. First, I needed to isolate him. I couldn't confront him when he had resources, contacts, or the element of surprise on his side. I needed him where I could control the environment, where I could manage the risks, and where I could observe every reaction. That meant drawing him out. That meant baiting him in a way that made him reveal himself. I made a few carefully worded calls, posing as concerned friends and acquaintances, probing for his location, his movements, his plans. Each answer I received was a piece of the puzzle, and slowly a pattern emerged. He was planning another test, a bigger one this time, one that would affect people beyond just me. The thought tightened my chest with urgency. I couldn't let it happen. Not on my watch. By mid-afternoon, I had a plan forming. I would confront him in a controlled environment, somewhere public but contained. I would bring evidence, witnesses if necessary, and I would ensure that no one else was at risk. The idea of bringing in authorities loomed in the back of my mind, but I held it there, a contingency. I needed him to see me first, not as a father pleading, not as a man afraid, but as someone who had anticipated his moves, someone who wouldn't be manipulated again. I prepared myself meticulously. I reviewed every encounter, every word I might say, every reaction I could anticipate. My pulse raced, but I forced it into a steady rhythm. Fear was a tool, not a weakness, and I could channel it into focus. By evening, I was ready. I knew where he would be, I knew how he would act, and I knew exactly what I had to do to confront him without falling into a trap. I arrived at the location, a small public library he frequented, under the guise of needing reference materials for work. I watched from a distance, noting his posture, his expressions, the subtle movements that betrayed tension. Even in a public place, he carried himself like he was orchestrating something, calculating reactions, testing boundaries. When he finally noticed me, his eyes flickered with recognition, a trace of surprise quickly masked by indifference. "Dad?" he said, casual, but with an edge I couldn't ignore. I stepped closer, calm and deliberate. "We need to talk," I said, low but firm. "Alone." He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. I could sense it. This was the first time my presence had genuinely unsettled him. He nodded subtly, and we moved to a quiet corner of the library, where our conversation wouldn't attract attention but where I could control the space. I laid out my evidence calmly but clearly. Messages, digital records, witness statements, notes on his experiments. Each piece was deliberate, a careful construction meant to show him that I understood everything. His expression shifted as he absorbed the weight of it. For the first time, I saw cracks in the mask of control he had cultivated so carefully. "You thought you could manipulate me, test me, push boundaries," I said, voice steady, eyes locked on his. "But I know who you are. I know what you've done, and this ends now." His lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of defiance and something else. Fear, perhaps, or realization. I could see the gears turning in his mind, calculating responses, considering options. But the difference now was that I held the advantage. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was acting strategically. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of power. Not power over him in a cruel sense, but power to reclaim control over my life, to set boundaries, and to ensure that what he had started could not continue. The storm inside me hadn't dissipated, but it had been channeled, sharpened into focus. The library was silent except for the faint rustle of pages and distant footsteps. Time felt suspended, each second stretching with tension. And in that suspended moment I realized something essential. The confrontation wasn't just about evidence, or danger, or fear. It was about connection, about forcing him to face reality, about reclaiming a bond that had been twisted into something dangerous. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, ready for the next step. Whatever came next, I knew this was the moment that would define everything. The reckoning wasn't over, it had just begun. The following morning the city woke in a haze of fog and pale sunlight, but I was already awake, alert, and restless. My mind replayed every conversation, every movement, every shadow I'd seen in the library the night before. My son's reactions had been subtle, but telling. The mask of indifference had slipped, if only for a second. That second told me everything I needed to know. He was human. He had limits. And those limits, if I pressed carefully, could make him reveal the truth. I spent hours preparing, reviewing my evidence, rehearsing questions, planning contingencies. I couldn't risk underestimating him again. He was clever, manipulative, and unafraid of danger, but he had a blind spot: his ego. That ego could be used against him. The thought gave me a cold sense of focus. I wasn't just a father seeking answers, I was a strategist in a game he had thought he controlled. By late afternoon, I had a plan. I would confront him at a place he never expected. Neutral ground, quiet, controlled. I arrived at a small, old cafe that had once been our favorite spot when he was a boy, tucked in a side street away from the main traffic. The smell of freshly baked bread and coffee grounds hit me instantly, bringing memories of simpler times. I almost faltered at the nostalgia, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about memories. This was about truth. I spotted him sitting at a corner table, hunched over his laptop, seemingly absorbed in something urgent. I approached calmly, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes, quickly replaced by an attempt at casual indifference. "Dad," he said, voice flat. "Sit," I said, tone firm but measured. "We need to talk, and this time, you need to be honest." For a long moment he said nothing. I could see the gears turning in his mind, the defensive walls he had spent years building. But something was different. The careful control, the smug confidence, both flickered and wavered. I realized then that the confrontation had already begun to unbalance him. I laid out the evidence methodically. The messages, the vials, the records of experiments, even the witness testimony from Mike, the pizza delivery guy. Each piece was deliberate, each fact chosen to dismantle the narrative he had built around his experiments. His expression shifted as he absorbed it. First disbelief, then defiance, then something softer, almost regretful. "You wanted to test me," I said quietly, locking eyes with him. "To see if I would trust you, if I would let my guard down. But you didn't just test me, you endangered me. You betrayed the only person who ever cared enough to guide you, protect you, and love you. Do you understand what you did?" He looked down at the table, silence stretching between us like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, less assured. I wanted to see if I mattered to you, if you trusted me. I didn't think it would go this far." The confession hit me with a jolt, a mixture of relief and fury. Relief that there was, somewhere beneath the manipulations, a boy I once knew. Fury at the recklessness and danger his ego had unleashed. I leaned closer, voice steady but cutting. "You went too far. You crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. You put lives at risk. Not just mine, but anyone who could have been caught in your tests. That's not trust. That's cruelty." Tears shimmered in his eyes, unbidden, betraying the boy beneath the man he had tried to become. For the first time in weeks, I saw vulnerability, and it changed everything. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a moment of clarity, a revelation that beneath the anger, the fear, and the manipulation, we still had a chance to reconnect. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease just slightly. "I don't want to see you hurt, and I don't want to see you hurt anyone else. But you need to understand the weight of your choices, and you need to take responsibility for what you've done." He nodded, still quiet, still processing, but the defensiveness was gone. In its place was the tentative recognition of consequences, a flicker of accountability. I realized then that the reckoning wasn't about punishment alone. It was about making him face reality, understand boundaries, and see the human cost of manipulation. We sat in silence for a while, the faint hum of the cafe around us, the smell of coffee and baked bread grounding us both in the present. And I realized that the confrontation, as tense and frightening as it had been, had shifted something fundamental. I had shown him the consequences of his actions, the danger of arrogance, and the reality of human trust. By the time we left the cafe, the sun was dipping below the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets. He walked beside me, quieter than usual but present, aware, and I felt a strange, cautious relief. The storm wasn't over. The relationship wasn't fixed. But for the first time, I could see a path forward, a path that didn't end in destruction, a path that might eventually lead to understanding and even redemption. I knew the days ahead would be difficult, that there would be more challenges, more conversations, more reckonings, but for now, I had faced the danger, confronted the betrayal, and begun to reclaim control. And in that, I found a small, fragile victory, one I intended to protect and build upon in the chapters yet to come. The morning after our cafe confrontation, the world felt strangely quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I woke early, restless, haunted by the echoes of yesterday's conversation. My son had admitted to his recklessness, to his experiments, but there was still a long road ahead. Confession was one thing, accountability and change were another. And I wasn't naive. I knew the darkness that had guided his actions didn't vanish overnight. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table reviewing notes, messages, and observations once more. Each detail, each pattern, still mattered. Understanding him fully meant seeing beyond the apology, beyond the flicker of remorse, to the core of why he had acted the way he did. I realized that this confrontation was not just about control or survival. It was about connection, about rebuilding trust, about facing the consequences of choices we had both made, directly and indirectly. I called him later that morning. He answered immediately, a hesitant tension in his voice that betrayed both anticipation and fear. "Dad," he said softly. "Come to the house," I replied. "We need to talk, really talk, no distractions." When he arrived, he looked smaller than usual, hunched slightly, like the weight of yesterday's confrontation had pressed him down. The sight struck a chord deep inside me. I had been angry, yes, furious even, but now I realized how much of our conflict had been born from misunderstanding, from distance, from years of failing to see one another clearly. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming in and glinting off the old wooden surface. I poured a second cup of coffee for him, the aroma warming the space between us. I watched as he accepted it with trembling hands, eyes fixed on the cup rather than me. "You know," I began slowly, "I've been thinking a lot about why you did what you did, and I need you to hear me clearly. You crossed a line that could have ended lives. That line doesn't just exist, it's there for a reason. But I also understand that there's a part of you that feels unheard, underestimated, and ignored. That's why you acted the way you did." He looked up, eyes glistening, and for a moment, vulnerability replaced defiance. I wanted to prove myself, to show that I mattered, that I wasn't just some kid you raised and then forgot. I didn't think anyone would get hurt. I never meant for it to go that far. I nodded slowly. "I know, and I believe that somewhere in there, you didn't intend harm, but intent isn't everything. Action carries consequences, and you need to understand those consequences fully, not just intellectually, but emotionally. You need to feel the weight of what you did, to understand how it affects others, and to learn from it." There was silence for a long moment, filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. I could see him processing, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing, replaced by a cautious awareness. I realized then that this was the turning point, not just for our relationship, but for his development, for his understanding of responsibility, and for the fragile trust that remained between us. "I want to make things right," he said finally, voice low but determined. "I don't know how yet, but I want to try." The words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. Relief, hope, and lingering caution mingled together. I reached across the table, placing my hand lightly on his. "Then we'll do it together. But you have to commit to honesty, accountability, and change. No shortcuts, no hiding, no tests. This isn't about experiments, it's about life, real life, and the people in it." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tight coil of fear in my chest begin to loosen. I realized that while the danger of his actions hadn't fully passed, the emotional storm that had consumed both of us was finally starting to shift. The confrontation, the reckoning, and now the tentative step toward reconciliation were creating a path forward, one that required work, patience, and vigilance, but one that also offered hope. We spent hours talking, not just about the pizza or the experiments, but about everything we had avoided for years. Feelings unspoken, misunderstandings, resentments, fears. Each revelation was like a brick removed from a wall we had built between us. Painful, yes, but necessary. I could see him opening up, tentatively, cautiously, but opening nonetheless. And I realized that the danger of yesterday's actions, while severe, had created an opportunity for truth, clarity, and growth. By evening, I felt a fragile sense of relief. We weren't fully healed, not by a long shot, but we had taken a crucial step. We had acknowledged the problem, faced the consequences, and chosen to engage rather than retreat. The storm hadn't passed, but the clouds had parted enough to glimpse the possibility of light. I looked at my son sitting across from me and felt a mix of pride, fear, and cautious optimism. He had caused immense pain, but he was willing to confront it, to take responsibility, and to start rebuilding. And I knew, deep down, that this moment, fraught, fragile, and intense, would shape the rest of our relationship. The night settled around us, quiet and heavy, but different from before. The tension remained, but it was tempered by understanding. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt that the path forward, though uncertain, was possible. We would face it together, and maybe, just maybe, we could come out of this stronger than we had ever been before. The days that followed our cafe confrontation were tense, but purposeful. My son had begun to show signs of reflection, a cautious willingness to engage with the reality of his actions. Yet I knew words alone weren't enough. True redemption required action, accountability, and a recognition of the consequences he had set into motion. I decided we would start with small steps. We began by reviewing the full scope of his experiments, cataloging each action, each risk, and each potential victim. I watched him carefully as he acknowledged the weight of his choices. There was guilt, yes, but also a glimmer of understanding. The first real sign that he was beginning to internalize the seriousness of what he had done. One afternoon, we drove to the local community center where he had unknowingly endangered some volunteers by experimenting with harmless pranks that mirrored the intensity of his pizza stunt. We met with the staff, confessed, and worked through the process of accountability. My son listened quietly, sometimes flinching at the descriptions of how his actions affected others, sometimes nodding with sincere regret. It was uncomfortable, humbling, and exhausting, but necessary. As we left the center, I could feel a subtle shift. He was quieter than usual, introspective, no longer the brash, calculating boy who had orchestrated the pizza incident. "I didn't realize how much I hurt people," he admitted, voice low. "I was thinking about me, about proving something. I didn't think beyond that." "You weren't thinking," I said gently, "and that's exactly why this mattered. Understanding consequences isn't instinctive. It has to be learned. And now you are learning it, in full. The weight of what you've done will guide your actions from here on." We spent the next several days repairing the damage, reaching out to friends, neighbors, and acquaintances who had been affected indirectly by his experiments. Each encounter was a lesson in empathy, humility, and responsibility. I watched him struggle, stumble, and gradually regain a sense of perspective. His pride, once a weapon, had softened into something more human, an awareness that actions have consequences, and trust is fragile. Evenings were spent talking. Not lectures, not confrontations, but conversations. We revisited memories of his childhood, of mistakes I had made as a father, of times we had miscommunicated, misunderstood, or neglected each other's needs. Slowly, a bridge was being rebuilt, fragile, uneven, but real. And with every honest exchange, I felt the tension in my chest ease, replaced by cautious hope. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me, eyes wide, searching. "Dad, I want to make things right. Not just with you, but with myself. I don't want to be that person anymore." I nodded slowly, the breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. "Then you start by living differently, by thinking beyond yourself, by considering the impact of every choice. And you don't just change for me, you change for you. That's where it counts." He absorbed the words silently, then, unexpectedly, reached over and clasped my hand. It was tentative, awkward, but meaningful. For the first time in weeks, I felt a connection, a bridge across the chasm his actions had created. It was fragile, yes, but it was there. We continued this work over the next several weeks. Each day brought its challenges. Old habits resurfaced, temptations to manipulate or test lingered, and I had to remain vigilant. But with each step, he grew more aware, more accountable, and more human in ways he hadn't been before. And then, one evening, I realized something profound. In guiding him through the consequences, in demanding accountability, in teaching him empathy and responsibility, I had found something myself. I had been consumed by fear and anger, yes, but I had also been reminded of the power of connection, of the importance of patience, and of the possibility of redemption, even after the darkest betrayals. I looked at my son, now quieter, reflective, and cautiously hopeful, and I felt a sense of pride that was tempered by awareness. The journey wasn't over. Redemption wasn't instant, but it was underway, and that, in itself, was enough to inspire cautious optimism. As the sun set, casting a warm glow across the yard, I felt a sense of closure approaching. Not a complete closure, for that would take time, trust, and ongoing work, but a real, tangible shift. The storm of anger, fear, and betrayal had begun to clear, leaving space for understanding, accountability, and cautious healing. I realized then that sometimes the hardest battles aren't against others, but against the consequences of their actions, against the failures of understanding, and against the challenge of rebuilding trust where it has been shattered. And as I watched my son walk back inside, a hint of purpose in his step, I knew that, despite everything, there was hope, a real, enduring hope that he could choose a better path and that we could begin to heal together. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain from the previous night and the faint aroma of coffee from the kitchen. I woke earlier than usual, not out of obligation, but out of a sense of quiet reflection. The tension that had gripped me for weeks, the fear, the anger, the betrayal, was still there, but it had shifted into something more manageable: understanding, acceptance, and cautious hope. I watched my son move around the kitchen, careful, deliberate, yet noticeably calmer than the tense, calculating figure I had faced just days ago. He brewed coffee for both of us, the simple gesture carrying a weight of significance. It was a silent acknowledgement, a tentative bridge being built from the wreckage of our fractured relationship. We sat together at the table, 2 cups steaming between us, and for the first time, the silence was not heavy with fear or resentment. It was comfortable, tentative, but real. I could see him thinking, processing, and for the first time truly considering the impact of his actions beyond his own ego or curiosity. "Dad," he said, voice low, almost hesitant, "I know I've made mistakes, big mistakes. I've hurt you, and I've put others at risk. I can't undo what I did, but I want to make things right. Not just because I have to, but because I want to be better." I looked at him, studying the boy I had raised, the man he was becoming, and the weight of responsibility we both carried. "It won't be easy," I said carefully. "Redemption isn't a single act or apology. It's a series of choices, every day, that show you understand consequences and that you care about others. But I believe you can do it." I see it now, and I will help you, as long as you are willing to help yourself." He nodded, eyes glistening, a mixture of guilt, relief, and determination shining through. It was a fragile moment, but a real one. I realized then that the journey wasn't about erasing the past. It was about confronting it, accepting it, and choosing a better path forward. Over the next days, we continued to repair the damage. He reached out to friends, neighbors, and acquaintances he had affected indirectly, offering apologies and explanations. He volunteered at the community center, assisting with safe activities, learning how to channel his intelligence and curiosity into constructive work rather than destructive experiments. I watched him cautiously, ready to intervene if necessary, but increasingly impressed by his willingness to change. And as he grew more responsible, more empathetic, I noticed changes in myself as well. The constant tension that had consumed me, the fear that my son was beyond redemption, the anger that had burned like a fire in my chest, began to dissipate. I allowed myself to hope, to trust, and to feel pride again. The bond we had nearly destroyed had started to heal, fragile but genuine. One evening, we sat on the porch together, the sky painted with the fiery colors of sunset. The air was warm, the city humming softly in the distance, and for the first time in weeks, there was peace. My son turned to me, a faint smile on his lips. "Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it." I reached over, clasping his hand in mine. "You don't always make it easy," I said with a dry chuckle, "but everyone deserves a chance to do better, including you, and including me, for the mistakes I've made along the way." We sat there for a long time, silent but connected, two people who had been through fear, betrayal, and danger, now standing at the threshold of understanding and trust. I realized that the danger wasn't just in his actions. It had been in our inability to communicate, to understand each other, to see the humanity beneath pride, fear, and ego. And now, that understanding had begun to bridge the divide. In the following weeks, life regained a semblance of normalcy. We continued to work on ourselves, on our relationship, and on making amends for the past. He became more grounded, more thoughtful, and more aware of the consequences of his actions. I, in turn, learned to balance vigilance with trust, fear with hope, and judgment with patience. The memory of the pizza incident remained, a shadow in the background, but no longer a source of constant fear or anger. It had served as a harsh lesson, yes, but also as a catalyst for change, growth, and the fragile renewal of trust. One evening, as I closed the blinds and turned off the lights, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The danger had passed, the reckoning had been faced, and a new chapter had begun, not just for my son, but for both of us. The storm had tested us, pushed us to our limits, and revealed the vulnerabilities and strengths in our relationship. And through it all, we had found a way forward. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't in a long time: peace. It was tentative, cautious, and fragile, but it was real. And in that quiet moment, I realized that despite the fear, the danger, and the betrayal, we had survived, learned, and begun to heal, together. The sun set outside, the sky deepening into rich shades of purple and orange, casting a warm glow over the yard. I watched my son walk past, purposeful yet calm, and I knew, truly knew, that redemption was possible. Trust could be rebuilt, and that even after the darkest storms, there was hope for a better tomorrow.